Angela Morrison was not born into luxury or privilege. She came from a small neighborhood where people dreamed big, but rarely got the chance to live those dreams. Her parents worked hard. Her mother was a nurse and her father drove a taxi. They didn't have much, but they had something far more valuable: determination and belief in hard work. From a very young age, Angela watched her parents struggle to make ends meet, and she promised herself that one day she would change that story, not just for herself, but for her entire family. Angela was always curious and ambitious. In school, she wasn't the loudest student in the room, but she was the most focused. While other kids talked about weekend plans, Angela spent time reading about business, leadership, and technology. Her teachers noticed her sharp mind and encouraged her to aim higher. She loved computers, loved solving problems, and loved the idea of building something that could make life easier for others. That spark would one day become the heart of her career. When Angela went to college, it wasn't easy. She had to work part-time jobs to pay tuition and rent. There were days she didn't eat a full meal, days she studied under dim lights because she couldn't afford a proper apartment. But every struggle added fuel to her fire. She wasn't just chasing success, she was chasing respect. She wanted to prove that a black woman could lead, innovate, and stand tall in a world that too often underestimated her. After graduation, Angela got her first job at a big tech company. It was exciting at first. New office, smart people, big projects. But it didn't take long for her to notice something that bothered her deeply. No matter how hard she worked, she was rarely given credit. Her ideas were often dismissed, only to be repeated by someone else later and praised as brilliant. She saw promotions go to people who were less qualified but looked the part. It was frustrating, but Angela refused to let bitterness take over. Instead, she quietly took notes, learning not only the work but also how the system operated. Years passed and Angela's experience grew. She became an expert in business strategy and digital transformation, helping companies grow faster through technology. But inside, she knew she was meant for more than just being part of someone else's success story. One day, after another meeting where her ideas were ignored, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She quit. It was a risky move. She had no investors, no fancy office, and no guarantees. But she had knowledge, drive, and faith. With a borrowed laptop and a tiny desk in her apartment, she started her own consulting company. In the beginning, it was just her, working late nights, calling clients, writing proposals, and building a website all by herself. She faced rejection after rejection. Many companies didn't take her seriously because she was a young black woman running a tech firm. But every no only made her stronger. Then one day her big break came. A mid-sized company struggling with digital systems gave her a chance to pitch her ideas. Angela prepared day and night. She walked into that meeting with confidence, presented her vision clearly, and blew them away. Within months, the company's profits increased and word began to spread about the woman who could turn technology into success. Soon, bigger clients started calling. Angela hired her first few employees, young professionals who believed in her mission. Her company grew fast, not just because of smart business strategies, but because Angela treated her team like family. She believed in fairness, mentorship, and creating opportunities for others who were often overlooked. Her leadership style was calm but firm, humble but strong. People respected her because she earned it. Within a few years, Angela's company became one of the top-performing tech consulting firms in the region. She was invited to speak at conferences, featured in magazines, and recognized for her leadership and innovation. Yet, despite all the attention, she stayed grounded. She still called her parents every Sunday, still mentored young women in tech, and still believed that success meant nothing without integrity. On the surface, Angela had everything: wealth, recognition, and influence. But her real pride came from something deeper. She had built her dream from scratch, and she had done it without compromising who she was. She had faced racism, sexism, and countless moments of doubt, but she never let any of it define her. She defined herself. Now, years later, Angela was flying back from New York after sealing one of her biggest business deals yet. The client she had just signed would expand her company internationally. She sat in the airport lounge, smiling quietly as she sipped her coffee. Life had come a long way from the days of late-night studying and empty stomachs. She had worked for everything she had, and she had earned the right to sit in first class, not because of privilege, but because of perseverance. Little did Angela know, that flight home would become one of the most talked about moments of her career. Not because of a business deal, but because of an incident that would test her composure, her power, and her grace in a way she never imagined. Angela arrived at the airport feeling proud but peaceful. Her meetings in New York had gone better than she expected, and the deal she'd just closed would open doors for her company around the world. She had worked hard for years to earn moments like this, moments where success felt steady, not like a lucky break. As she walked through the busy airport, rolling her sleek black suitcase behind her, she felt grateful. She looked elegant but simple. A navy blue business suit, soft curls falling to her shoulders, and a calm smile that showed quiet confidence. The check-in process was smooth. The staff at the counter smiled as she handed over her ticket. "First class to Los Angeles," she said politely. The attendant nodded, printed her boarding pass, and directed her to the VIP lounge. Everything felt normal. Everything felt right. Until it didn't. When boarding time was announced, Angela gathered her things and walked to the gate. The line for first class was short, just a few passengers ahead of her. She stood there quietly, scrolling through her phone, replying to work messages. When her turn came, she stepped forward with a warm smile and handed her ticket to the gate agent. The woman behind the counter, dressed in a crisp airline uniform, barely looked up. She scanned Angela's boarding pass, frowned, and then looked her up and down slowly, as if something didn't fit. "Ma'am," she said in a slightly doubtful tone, "are you sure you're in the right line?" Angela blinked, caught off guard. "Yes," she replied gently. "This is the first-class line. My ticket should be in order." The agent hesitated, then sighed and checked the screen again. "It says first class," she murmured, sounding almost surprised. Then she called over another attendant and whispered something. The second attendant looked at Angela, then at the ticket, then back again, and both frowned as if something about her didn't belong there. Other passengers began to glance over. A few of them, mostly older, well-dressed travelers, looked curious, some even amused. Angela could feel their eyes on her, the silent question floating in the air. "What's she doing here?" "I'm sorry," the agent said finally, straightening her posture. "We're having a problem verifying your ticket. Could you please step aside for a moment while we sort this out?" Angela's heartbeat quickened, but her expression stayed calm. She moved to the side as instructed. One by one, the passengers behind her, all white, mostly businessmen, were waved through without question. No one else's ticket was under verification. Within minutes, the first-class line was empty, and Angela was still standing there. "Excuse me," she said politely. "May I ask what seems to be the issue?" The first attendant avoided eye contact. "It's just standard procedure," she said, tapping nervously on her keyboard. "Sometimes our system needs an extra check." Angela knew that wasn't true. She had flown hundreds of times. She'd been in airports all around the world, London, Tokyo, Dubai, and never once had she been told her ticket needed verification. Something about this moment felt painfully familiar. It wasn't about the ticket. It was about her. Finally, the attendant looked up and said, "You'll have to wait until the flight supervisor arrives. It may take a while." Angela looked at the digital clock above the gate. Boarding was nearly complete. Her seat was probably already being discussed by the crew. She took a slow breath. Years of professionalism had taught her one thing: never let anger speak louder than dignity. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping aside again. But inside she felt the sting of humiliation. People walked past her, glancing briefly, whispering to each other. A few even smiled awkwardly, pretending not to notice. The supervisor arrived 10 minutes later, asked a few quick questions, checked the ticket, and instantly confirmed that everything was fine. There had been no problem with her reservation at all. "Oh, it's all good," the supervisor said casually, almost too cheerfully. "You can go ahead and board now, but the damage was done." Angela looked at the attendants, their faces pale with guilt and discomfort, and then at the people watching. She could have caused a scene. She could have shouted, demanded answers, made a video like so many others had, but instead she did something unexpected. She smiled, that same calm, confident smile she always carried, and said, "Thank you. I appreciate your help." Then she walked down the jet bridge with quiet grace. As she took her seat in first class, she didn't feel proud. She didn't even feel angry anymore. She felt tired of moments like this, where people made assumptions before facts. Tired of being tested in places she had already earned her place in, she looked out the window as the plane prepared for takeoff. The sky outside was golden, the sun dipping below the clouds. For a brief moment she thought about letting it go, but then she remembered something her father once told her. When you let silence cover injustice, it grows stronger. Angela reached for her phone, opened her contacts, and scrolled until she found the name she was looking for. A senior executive she'd met at an international business conference 2 years ago. He was now part of the airline's corporate leadership team. With one calm breath, she pressed call, and that single phone call would change everything. The airplane's engines were humming softly, and passengers were settling into their wide leather seats. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, offering drinks and warm towels. Angela sat quietly by the window, pretending to focus on her phone, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The moment at the boarding gate still played in her mind like a broken clip she couldn't turn off. She had faced disrespect before, but this time, it cut differently. It wasn't about words or tone. It was about the unspoken message behind the looks, the hesitation, the assumption that she didn't belong there. Across the aisle, a businessman in a gray suit leaned over to whisper something to his colleague. Both looked toward Angela, then quickly looked away. She wasn't sure what they said, but the smirk on one man's face told her enough. She turned her gaze back to the window, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" a flight attendant asked with a polite smile. Angela nodded. "Just water, thank you." The attendant poured her a glass, but Angela noticed a subtle difference. The same woman had been offering champagne to the other first-class passengers. She didn't say anything. Maybe it was just an oversight, maybe not. She simply thanked her and took a sip, the cool water calming her nerves. A few minutes later, the captain announced they'd be experiencing a short delay before takeoff due to a minor paperwork issue. The passengers groaned softly. One man muttered, probably because of her ticket mess. He didn't whisper quietly enough. Angela turned her head slowly. The man met her eyes for a second before pretending to scroll through his phone. She took a slow, deep breath. This wasn't the first time she had faced subtle humiliation in professional spaces, but somehow, every time it happened, it still stung the same. She closed her eyes for a moment and reminded herself of who she was. She wasn't just any passenger. She wasn't someone trying to fit in where she didn't belong. She belonged everywhere she worked for. She had earned this seat, not through luck or favors, but through years of sleepless nights, hard choices and sacrifices that no one else could see. Still, the sting of what had happened refused to fade. She replayed the gate attendant's doubtful tone, the looks from other passengers, the whispering, the quiet laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make her feel small, and that was exactly what she couldn't allow. The flight finally took off. As the plane rose through the clouds, Angela opened her laptop and began typing an email. Not a complaint, not a rant, but a clear and professional summary of the incident. She included every detail. The time, the staff names, their words, their tone, even how the supervisor reacted. Her words were calm, factual, and powerful. She didn't send it yet. She simply saved it, took a breath, and thought carefully. She wasn't angry, she was disappointed. There's a difference between reacting emotionally and responding intelligently. Angela had spent years learning to master the difference. About an hour into the flight, one of the attendants returned. "Ma'am," she said, smiling nervously, "I just wanted to make sure everything is okay. We're sorry again for the confusion earlier." Angela looked up, her face unreadable but composed. "Everything's fine," she said gently. "I just hope the next person in my position doesn't have to go through that same confusion." The woman's smile faded slightly. "Yes, of course," she replied before walking away. Angela wasn't rude. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness spoke louder than any argument could. But deep inside, she felt something stronger than anger. A quiet fire. She thought of the younger version of herself. The woman just starting out in business. The one who had to prove herself in rooms full of people who didn't believe she belonged. She thought of every young black woman watching, working and pushing forward in a world that still doubted them. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what it meant to be judged before being known, dismissed before being respected. When the plane finally landed, Angela gathered her things slowly. The same people who had doubted her rushed out first, eager to get ahead. She waited, calm and graceful, as if time itself worked on her schedule. As she walked down the aisle, a few passengers avoided eye contact. Maybe they realized what they had done. Maybe they didn't care. Either way, she walked out with her head high. Inside the terminal, her phone buzzed with a notification. A message from one of her assistants. "Congratulations again, Angela. News about the deal is trending online. You're making waves." She smiled faintly. The world was celebrating her success while at the same time, a few strangers had tried to make her feel small. The contrast was almost poetic. That night, in her hotel room, Angela sat by the window with her laptop open. The city lights glowed beneath her, endless and bright. She opened her email draft again, the one she had written during the flight. She added a few more lines, this time with a simple ending. "No one should be treated this way regardless of appearance, color, or assumption. I hope this message helps bring change." Then she hit send. The next morning, her message would reach the inbox of someone powerful, someone who had the authority to make real changes within the airline. But at that moment, Angela didn't know how big that one message, and later, one phone call, would become. She had no idea that by standing tall in silence, she had already started a storm. The night after the flight was quiet, but Angela couldn't sleep. The soft hum of the city outside her hotel window was constant, almost comforting, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the day. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast and fades. What she felt was deeper, heavier. It was disappointment wrapped in calm, the kind of calm that comes before a decision that changes everything. She sat by the window, her laptop open but untouched. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, tired eyes still wearing the same quiet strength she had shown all day. She thought about how many times she'd stayed silent before, choosing peace over confrontation. But this time silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like permission. Permission for others to keep treating people like her as if they didn't belong. Angela wasn't someone who acted out of impulse. Every move she made was deliberate, thoughtful, strategic, the same qualities that had made her a successful CEO. And tonight, those same qualities guided her again. She opened her phone and scrolled to her contact list until she found the name she was looking for. Daniel Harris, Senior Vice President at the Airline Corporation. They had met 2 years earlier at a global business conference in Geneva. He had been impressed by her talk about diversity and leadership in technology. They had stayed in touch and professional, respectful, and cordial. Angela stared at his name for a moment, thinking carefully. Then she pressed call. It rang twice before a warm voice answered. "Angela Morrison." What a surprise. "How are you?" Her tone was calm but firm. "Hi, Daniel. I wish I were calling under better circumstances." She told him everything, not with anger, not with emotion, but with precision. Every word was clear, every detail exact. She described the hesitation at the gate, the whispers, the humiliation, the fake ticket, verification, and the dismissive tone of the staff. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened, and the silence on his end said more than words ever could. When she finished, he exhaled sharply. "Angela, I'm speechless. That should have never happened. You were treated unfairly, and I'm truly sorry." "I appreciate that, Daniel," Angela said gently. "But I'm not looking for apologies. I'm looking for accountability. If this can happen to me, someone with influence, someone who has a voice, imagine what happens to others who don't." There was another pause, then Daniel replied, "You're absolutely right. Leave this to me. I'll look into it personally." Angela thanked him, her voice steady, but her eyes wet. Not from sadness, but from release, from finally saying what needed to be said. When the call ended, she closed her phone, leaned back in her chair, and exhaled deeply. The calmness that followed wasn't the quiet before anger. It was the silence of control. The next morning, Angela went about her day as usual. She attended her virtual meetings, reviewed project reports, and even laughed with her team during a brainstorming session. To anyone watching, it was just another productive morning for a successful CEO. But behind her calm smile, something powerful was unfolding. At the airline's headquarters, Daniel Harris had already started making calls of his own. He contacted the regional manager, then the HR director, and finally the public relations department. Within hours, the internal investigation was underway. Emails flew back and forth, reports were pulled, and CCTV footage from the boarding gate was requested. By noon, what had happened to Angela Morrison was no longer a small incident. It was a corporate crisis. But Angela didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that she had done her part. She had spoken up. The rest would unfold on its own. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Angela took a quiet walk through the park near her hotel. The golden light touched everything softly, the trees, the benches, even her face. Children were laughing nearby. People jogged past her. And for the first time that day, she felt at peace. She thought about her parents, her father's steady wisdom, her mother's constant strength. They had both taught her that real power isn't in shouting. It's in standing tall when others try to bend you. She smiled at the thought. When she returned to her room later that night, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Daniel. Angela, thank you for bringing this to my attention. We've confirmed what happened. Senior leadership has been informed. I'll keep you updated. She read it twice, then set the phone down gently. The calm she felt was different now. It wasn't the quiet of being ignored. It was the quiet of knowing something big was about to happen. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance and rain began to fall. The city light shimmered through the drops on her window, turning the night into a blur of gold and silver. Angela watched it for a long time, her expression steady, her heart strong. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she did know one thing. She had finally drawn a line. And this time, when the storm arrived, it wouldn't break her. It would reveal her power. The next morning began like any other day for Angela. Except this time, the world had already started moving behind the scenes. She woke up early, just as the city lights faded into daylight. Her phone buzzed with new messages and meeting reminders. The sky outside was clear, the kind of calm that usually follows a storm, though Angela didn't yet know that her storm had just begun to move through the airline's corporate towers. She made herself a cup of coffee, opened her laptop, and started her routine check-ins. But halfway through her first email, her phone rang. The name flashing on the screen made her pause. Daniel Harris. She answered immediately. Good morning, Daniel. His voice came through serious, controlled, but there was tension behind it. Angela, I wanted to call you personally before this goes any further. I spoke with our executive board early this morning. Angela stayed silent, listening carefully. What you described, Daniel continued, wasn't just a misunderstanding. We reviewed the footage, the audio logs, and passenger statements. Everything you said was accurate. In fact, it was worse than we thought. Angela's eyes softened, though her face remained calm. I see. The staff involved made inappropriate remarks after you boarded, he said quietly. One of them even joked that they thought your ticket must have been a mistake. For a moment, Angela didn't respond. The words didn't surprise her. They just confirmed what she already knew. Prejudice didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered, just loud enough to sting. I appreciate you telling me the truth, she said gently. Daniel hesitated. There's more. The CEO of the airline has been informed. He wants to reach out personally to apologize. This isn't going away quietly, Angela. It's serious. Angela looked out the window. The city below was busy, people rushing to work, planes flying overhead, life moving as usual. Yet she knew something was shifting, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been dismissed because of what they looked like. Daniel, she said, her tone composed but firm, this isn't about me. It's about accountability. I want the airline to understand that incidents like this don't just damage reputation. They damage trust. People deserve to travel without being judged. If your company truly believes in equality, now is the time to prove it. Her words hung in the air, clear, powerful, and impossible to ignore. Daniel's voice lowered. "You have my word, Angela. We're already taking action. The staff will be suspended pending investigation. Training programs are being reviewed. The media team is preparing a statement, but..." He paused. "Would you be willing to speak with the CEO directly? He'd like to hear from you before anything is finalized." Angela thought for a moment. "Yes," she said. "If he's willing to listen, I'm willing to speak." 2 hours later, her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She answered, and a deep, polite voice greeted her. "Ms. Morrison, this is Richard Cole, CEO of Skyworld Airlines. I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened to you. I've reviewed the reports myself. What you experienced was unacceptable, and it's not who we claim to be as a company." Angela listened in silence, her expression calm, but her presence commanding. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Cole," she said. "But apologies are only meaningful when they create change. What happened to me isn't new. It happens every day to people who don't have a platform to speak up. I just happen to be one of the few who can call someone at the top." There was a pause. Then the CEO replied, "You're absolutely right. I'd like to invite you to meet with our executive board, virtually if that works, to discuss real solutions. Not PR statements, but policies. We need to fix this." Angela agreed. "I'll share my ideas," she said simply. "Let's make sure this conversation doesn't end with me." When the call ended, she sat in silence, staring at her phone for a long moment. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It wasn't revenge either. It was something stronger, a quiet pride. Her one call had rippled all the way to the top of one of the biggest airlines in the country. A problem they might have brushed aside for anyone else had now become a corporate emergency. By afternoon, news began to travel. Not to the media yet, but within the company. Internal emails leaked, managers whispered, and staff everywhere were suddenly talking about the woman who made a single phone call that reached the CEO. Meanwhile, Angela stayed composed. She didn't brag. She didn't tweet. She didn't even tell her team. She carried on with her work, answering client emails, reviewing proposals, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Because for her, power didn't mean shouting or boasting. It meant knowing when to speak, and whom to speak to. That evening, as the sun set, her assistant knocked on her office door. "You've been quiet all day," she said softly. "Everything okay?" Angela smiled faintly. "Everything's in motion," she said. Sometimes silence moves louder than noise. She looked out her window. The same sky that had watched her humiliation now watched her rise. What began as a moment of injustice was no longer just a story of discrimination. It was becoming a story of accountability, courage, and leadership. Angela didn't know it yet, but within 24 hours, her name, and her calm, firm response, would become a headline across the country. All because of one phone call. By the next morning, the world inside Skyworld Airlines didn't feel the same. What began as a small misunderstanding at an airport gate had turned into a corporate earthquake. Angela Morrison's name was now being whispered in executive meetings, mentioned in emails marked urgent, and discussed in hallways that usually stayed silent. No one outside the company knew yet, not the press, not the public, but inside everyone was on edge. The airline's leadership team had gathered in a glass-walled boardroom high above the city. It was early and the mood was tense. Screens glowed with data, reports, and security footage from the boarding gate. The CEO, Richard Cole, stood at the head of the table holding a printed email, Angela's email. He read it aloud once more, slowly. Her words were polite but powerful. There was no anger in her tone, and only clarity, grace, and undeniable truth. One executive cleared his throat. "Sir, we've confirmed everything she described. The gate agent and attendant involved both violated customer protocol." Another executive added quietly, "And there are recordings. Passengers overheard comments about her not looking like a first-class traveler." It's spreading internally. The room fell silent. They all knew what that meant. If this reached the media, it wouldn't just be bad press. It would be a public reckoning. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Angela was sitting in her office, calm, focused, and radiant in her composure. To anyone walking by, she looked like any other CEO starting her day, reviewing reports, taking calls, guiding her team. But behind that calm smile, she knew what was unfolding. She hadn't called journalists or posted her story online. She didn't need to. Power wasn't in noise. It was in timing. She trusted that truth, once released, had a way of finding the light. By noon, Skyworld Airlines released an internal memo. It began with formal language. "We take matters of discrimination seriously." But the tone was different this time. It wasn't a template statement. It was real. It came straight from the top. The memo acknowledged an incident involving a high-profile passenger and announced an immediate suspension of the employees involved, pending further investigation. In offices across the country, airline staff whispered among themselves, "Did you hear? A CEO got discriminated against in first class. They say she made one phone call and everything flipped. Who is she?" Her name spread quietly at first, like wind before a storm. People started looking her up. Articles about her company, interviews, past speeches, everything about Angela Morrison began to surface again. Soon her face, calm, intelligent, and strong, was circulating among employees who had never even met her. And then it happened. That evening, a journalist from a major business outlet caught wind of the story. Someone inside the airline had leaked a part of the internal memo. Within hours, headlines started appearing online. Top airline investigates racial bias after black CEO's complaint. Business leaders' flight experience sparks corporate action. One call that shook an airline. The story went viral overnight. People on social media began sharing Angela's quotes from old interviews about leadership, equality, and respect. They didn't even need the full story yet. Her name itself carried weight. But while the internet burned with speculation, Angela stayed silent. No interviews. No statements. No posts. Her silence spoke louder than any press release could. Inside Skyworld's headquarters, the pressure mounted. The boardroom lights stayed on late into the night. Legal teams discussed damage control, PR advisors drafted official apologies, and HR executives scrambled to show immediate corrective measures. The CEO knew there was no quick fix this time. The world was watching, and more importantly, Angela was watching. The next morning, the airline's official apology was released. It mentioned unacceptable behavior, deep regret, and commitment to change. But the part that made headlines was the last paragraph. "We are in active discussion with Ms. Angela Morrison to implement new equity and sensitivity training for all staff. Her leadership and professionalism throughout this process have been exemplary." That line changed everything. The story wasn't just about discrimination anymore. It was about how a black woman turned humiliation into reform. People began to see Angela not as a victim, but as a leader who demanded respect without shouting for it. Across social media, her story inspired countless others to share their experiences. Messages poured into her company's inbox. From women, young professionals, even airline employees from other companies, all saying the same thing. "Thank you for speaking up. You gave us courage." Angela read a few of them late that night. She smiled softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from pride. She hadn't planned for any of this. All she wanted was fairness and a quiet correction to a loud wrong. But her calm had created something bigger, a wave of change. As she sat by her office window, the city lights twinkled below her, and planes crossed the dark sky above. The same sky that once carried her humiliation now carried her victory. Angela whispered to herself, "Sometimes you don't have to fight to win. You just have to stand firm enough that the world feels your presence." And as the world spoke her name, Skyworld Airlines felt the full impact of that truth. The shockwave of a single moment that exposed their flaws, shook their systems, and changed them forever. The sun rose quietly over the city that morning, painting the skyline gold. Angela Morrison sat by her office window, watching the light spill across her desk. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications, messages, emails. Overnight, her story had become the headline everywhere. TV anchors were discussing it. Bloggers were analyzing it. Hashtags with her name were trending worldwide. But inside her office, Angela was still, calm, graceful, and thoughtful. Her assistant walked in holding a tablet. "It's everywhere," she said softly. "Every news channel, every platform. People are calling you the woman who changed an airline with one phone call. Angela smiled faintly. It was never about changing an airline, she replied. It's about changing the mindset that made something like that possible. For a moment, the room fell silent. Outside, cameras were already waiting. Reporters wanted interviews, statements, reactions. But Angela wasn't interested in chaos. She wanted clarity. She wanted to speak once, truthfully, powerfully, and with purpose. By noon, she agreed to make a public statement. No flashy press conference, no dramatic setting, just a simple podium, a microphone, and her calm presence. The moment she walked onto the stage, the room fell quiet. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. She wasn't dressed for power. No designer suit, no jewelry, just a clean white blouse and a soft gray blazer. But her confidence filled the room like thunder. She looked at the cameras, then at the small audience of journalists before her. And then she began, her voice steady but full of feeling. I didn't plan to become a story, she said softly. I didn't plan to make headlines. I just wanted to fly home with the same respect that every paying passenger deserves. Her words echoed in the silence. I was refused boarding because someone looked at me and decided I didn't fit their picture of a first-class passenger. It wasn't about a ticket. It was about assumption, an assumption based on my color, my gender, my presence. And unfortunately, it's an experience that many people face every day, in airports, in workplaces, and in life. She paused for a moment, her eyes calm, her voice unwavering. But this is not a story of anger. This is a story of accountability and of grace. Because when we respond with calm strength, people are forced to listen. When we demand respect without losing our own, we change more than just one situation. We change the system that allowed it. Cameras clicked softly. Some journalists looked down, emotional, taking notes. I don't want revenge. I don't want sympathy. I want progress. And I'm thankful that Skyworld Airlines has chosen to take responsibility. Not because they were exposed, but because they are willing to learn. Together, we will work to ensure that no one, regardless of race, color, or background, will ever face this again. Her voice grew stronger, steadier, filled with the conviction of someone who had carried both pain and pride through life. To every young woman watching this, to every person who has ever been made to feel small, I want you to remember this. Your worth is not up for debate. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You just have to stand tall and let the truth do the talking. The audience sat in silence. There was no applause yet, just awe. Angela took a small breath and smiled gently. Respect, she said, isn't a privilege. It's a right. And sometimes it takes one calm voice to remind the world of that truth. She stepped back from the podium, her message complete. Within hours, clips from her speech flooded social media. People shared her words with captions like, "This is how you lead with grace," and "Powerful beyond words." Her speech wasn't loud, but it was unforgettable. It didn't just touch hearts. It stirred consciences. Skyworld Airlines followed up with an official joint statement. We stand with Angela Morrison in our commitment to equity and respect. Her courage and professionalism have inspired lasting changes in our training and culture. Major outlets picked it up instantly. Newspapers called it a defining moment for corporate America. But for Angela, it wasn't about headlines or praise. That evening, after the storm of attention had passed, she sat alone in her office. Her phone kept buzzing with congratulations, but she didn't respond right away. She looked out the window again, at the same sky she had once stared at from her plane seat, holding back her hurt. Now that same sky seemed endless, open, and full of peace. She whispered quietly to herself, sometimes, life tests your patience not to break you, but to show others how strength really looks. Her phone lit up one more time. This time, a message from Daniel Harris. You changed the company, Angela, and maybe you changed more than that. Angela smiled. She didn't reply, she didn't need to. Some victories don't need words. And somewhere in that quiet moment, as the world replayed her speech again and again, Angela Morrison, the woman who had once been refused boarding, became something greater. Not just a CEO, not just a leader, but a symbol of dignity, grace, and unstoppable strength.